We're continuing the board game narrative here. And the past couple of vlogs that I've been pushing up to my board gaming playlist, there's this idea in board gaming. It's physical. It's analog. We're trying to set something up. We're trying to create a narrative, taking that time to immerse ourselves in a game. So for me, yes, mechanics are important because mechanics are the DNA that are going to deliver that gaming experience. But equally so, the idea of components, presentation, story. Do I really feel like I'm in the game? I mean, ideally, and I feel this a lot, Zombicide Invader as an example. When we're in the game, Zombicide Invader starts out, you get some gear, you're searching, a couple of invaders spawn, you're like, this is baby cakes, this is easy. And the next thing you know, really quick, the entire table is flooded with Xenos, and you're running all around, you're trying to escape, you're working as a team. It goes from a low level to a high level panic very, very, very fast, raising your heart rate. And there are times when I'm playing the game where if I step back and look at the whole table, it's a pretty interesting experience. It feels like for a moment that you're in the simulation. That's what I strive for. Like rule number one, Fritz Board Gaming, let's get in the simulation. Well, I should say rule number one is everyone has a place at my table. You want to play the game? Sit down. I want to pull you into the hobby. The game is only made for 6 players. We've already got 6 players. You want to play? I'll step up, give my seat. If not, because I have to run the game, then we'll break those rules. We can do 7 players. We can do 8 players. I regularly run Zombicide games and Talisman games with 8, 9, 10 players. But also anything we can do, now this leads into this vlog, anything we can do to keep the narrative, I want to pursue. I don't want to have a break in the game. I don't want to have a break in that narrative. And a perfect example, this is kind of a pet peeve, and I was thinking about it. I was looking at some of the titles in my collection, thinking about this, and then I'm going to turn it over to you guys. If you can name a title in your collection or a title that's out there that accommodates this. Dice. Physical dice. Games that use dice to determine the chances, to determine the output. They only give you just enough to play. Passing around dice is a narrative killer. It really kills the narrative. So all of the games that I regularly play with a group or big groups, I need to acquire multiple sets of dice. Ideally, I want every player to have their own set of dice. Now, example again, Zombicide Invader, I've got the dice that came with the game. I did pick up with the Kickstarter the custom dice, the different colors, and then I have a couple of extra sets of D6s. Now that's easy because it uses a D6 system. Even the custom dice with the Invader head, it's a D6 system. Games that use custom narrative dice with different symbols or different symbol sets, that becomes a little bit more problematic. Back in the day, Descent 2nd Edition, I had to go all in, and Fantasy Flight it's like half the price of a core just for some extra dice to be able to assemble enough dice that the Overlord can have their set of dice and each player can have their set of dice. Now, I understand why the duality of why companies only give you just enough dice to play. And I should say as a side note, what gets me a little bit more is a system that gives you not even enough dice to play, where as you level up and as your character gains in power, now you need to re-roll dice. I love Conan. It is an ideal game for me. The narrative is fantastic. If you've been following my channel, you know I love the Conan IP. I'm going to stop myself right there because I'll side tangent into Conan. But the great thing about Conan, you roll dice for successes and activations. And there's different colored dice depending on the power level. They don't give you enough dice, in theory, for the higher power levels. So if I go all in on Conan, and I'm like, I'm just gonna go crazy with Conan. We're just gonna go absolutely crazy with Conan. I have to re-roll dice that I've already rolled. That kills the narrative because I want to pick up the dice. I want to roll the dice. I want to cast them out, like casting the runes, casting the fates. And then I want to see, like, okay, what happened? What combos can I do? What opportunities? We see this sometimes with Descent, if you have the core. So games that don't even have enough dice. acquiring new dice. And especially, again, going back to the beginning, this idea of I want to play big games. I want to pull in as many players, as many old friends, as many new friends as possible to play. Potentially passing dice around is just kind of a killer. And on top of that, a lot of games will have checks, opposing checks. I'm the overlord. You're playing your character. You roll your dice. You activate your powers. You do X number of damage. Then what? You have to pass the dice to me. I have to roll my dice to defend and block, but we have to remember the successes or the failures or the power surges that you got on your dice. It's nice to have them laid out. I have my dice. We roll. We check. It keeps the game. It keeps the narrative going. But again, I understand. Let's put out the minimum amount of dice because over 20, 30, 50,000, 100,000, how many games we're going to print, that does add up. And at the same time, they get you on the other end, not even with custom dice, but just having to acquire other sets of dice. Now I'm going to flip it over to you guys. Dice, games in your collection. Do you have enough to accommodate all the players? Is that kind of an interesting action point? Or is Fritz just kind of totally out there, totally crazy? Side note, what I'm seeing more, the answer to the custom community and the board gaming community is the idea of 3D printing. Runebound second edition uses custom movement dice. These are dice with some terrain symbols on it. You roll it, you see the symbols you get, and then you can figure out where you want to move. It's a very, very interesting system. The other part of the dice that it uses are D10 to make checks against the monsters you fight. Well, that's really easy. I just raid the Dungeons & Dragons dice bag, and I got D10s everywhere, making it rain D10s. But the custom dice, that we had to pass around. And it was only literally years later that I was able to get these dice 3D printed and then just kind of ink the symbols on them. I am seeing games that have extreme custom dice, the ability to 3D print additional sets. So that's something that's very, very interesting, perhaps in the next 2 or 3 years moving ahead. So the dice in your collection, pet peeve or minor point or kind of roadblock, hurdle to the narrative.